Johnathan?
Hi, my name's Johnathan Coddington, and for the past 5 years, I've been the Associate Director for Science at the Natural Museum of Natural History. I'm here in lieu of Kirk Johnson, who is the director, who otherwise would be sitting in this seat. He's in Bhutan and couldn't make it today. But if I could, I'd like to start with I've done that job for 5 years, and my background professionally is about as far from repatriation as you could get. I'm actually a tropical and biologist and a student of the evolution of behavior. And when I took this job 5 years ago, I know it was going to be a diverse job, but for example, the National Museum of Natural History has over 95% of all objects the Smithsonian owns. At any one time, there are about 400 scientists there. Since 1846, they've published 55,000 publications that have been cited over 1 million times. So for generations, it's a place that has prided itself on its contributions. There's no place on earth that's like it. But then I found out that I was also going to become essentially the day-to-day liaison to the repatriation process. And I have to say, I'd like to thank all the current and former members of the Repatriation Review Committee, Bonnie and other people who are in the audience, as well as Kevin and other people, because obviously, if it's not obvious, I don't actually know what I'm talking about, right? And there was nothing that was as disturbing as repatriation in that job. In a job that big, you can imagine the kind of things that come over your desk. Nothing was, to me, as serious as repatriation. So just to start off with that, but the other thing that struck me was the mission of the National Museum of Natural History is to understand the natural world and our place in it. And when I first started interacting with repatriation, I thought to myself, well, there it is, right? You've got this scientific museum that wants to understand the natural world. And of course, we review humans as being part of the natural world, but our place in it. And between those two points of view lies the subject of repatriation in many ways. And another joke is that the difference between history and science runs right through the middle of every anthropology department in the country. So that was another thing, that within the Department of Anthropology, there were these sort of 2 points of view. The Repatriation Act that governs us says that we will use the best available scientific and historical evidence to settle repatriation claims, and that is certainly the mission of our repatriation office. And they do a lot. Every one of their repatriation reports, of which there have been about 140, are themselves admirable scholarly contributions that make original contributions to the history of Native Americans. For example, take all the stuff that's been written about Sitting Bull, for example. Many books, many thousands of words. It was our office that found out, this is just a factoid, but after his death, an Army doctor removed a lock of Sitting Bull's hair. So in doing these repatriation reports, our staff find things out about history and document things that happened in the history of Native Americans and Hawaiians and Native Alaskans that nobody ever knew before. So we're proud of that, and probably because one half of our brain is science, we really want to get it right. We don't want to make any mistakes. We don't want to hastily affiliate objects incorrectly with the wrong tribe, and we don't want to admit defeat. For example, we don't think that there's such a thing as an unaffiliated set of human remains. Sometime in the future, we'll figure it out. That's sort of the science in us speaking. But to speak to some of the numbers, though, which Kevin also referred to from the point of view of American Indian Museum, we do have about 19,000 sets of Native American remains. And just being part of the current generation of the people in that museum, it's been around since 1846. So I think we should all remember that we're just the latest in a rolling set of people who are going to have to deal with these things. But of those 19,000, we've repatriated 6,000 sets of human remains, so about a third. We hope to repatriate all of them. about 218,000 funerary objects. This is all to over 100 federally recognized tribes. 55 sacred objects offered for repatriation. And that's far more than, we have the largest Native American, Hawaiian, Alaskan collections in the country, by far. And so it's appropriate that we would have done more repatriations on a quantitative basis than anybody else. But still, we are proud to have engaged with this process to the extent that we have. We actually meet with about 30 tribes a year. We have over 1,000 interactions with them, have interacted with all the federally appropriated tribes. So that's just some of the facts about the appropriation process. Our repatriation process did actually start before the law. So we were already repatriating things, particularly named individuals, prior to this. So we're pretty dedicated to the whole idea of repatriation. I would also say there's a change in the scientific generations. It's true. Much of what Suzanne said or Patricia said about the relations between scientists and Native Americans in the 60s and the 70s and 80s, it's indisputable. But this is 2014, and the opinion in the scientific community has shifted dramatically. I mean, the arguments about a lot of this are over. It's just a question of kind of getting through the process. Let's see. So we've done, we had 17 claims prior to 1989, which was the first time we were covered by law. We've done 113 repatriations so far, done, sealed, and delivered. We have 8 ongoing at the moment, current claims. And our office, although one of the largest in the country devoted to repatriation, their job is to handle the claims that are on the desk at the moment. So taking your eyeball off those 8 claims and doing, say, proactive repatriation of the other 13,000 sets of human remains would be disrespectful to the people who have asked for consideration of claims. So about 113 of those, out of about 140 are done. 8 are in process. It's interesting that the difference between that often has to do with the ability of tribes to respond to a repatriation decision. So we, the museum or the repatriation office, can say, you're right, these have to go back, but either because of, tribes have many other priorities. And so about 24 claims are waiting on responses from the communities to which they were repatriated. So that's repatriation in the past. I'd like to turn a little bit to repatriation in the future. And certainly when I took over this job and I watched how the Repatriation Review Committee interacted with the other scientists in the museum, it was sort of like I thought, we should channel Joan Rivers, like, let's talk. And that's what I spent 5 years actually personally trying to do, is to increase the amount of, the repatriation wants to consult with tribes, but just with the committee, getting them to, for example, I instituted a procedure peer review so that the Repatriation Review Committee reviews all of the repatriation documents in draft, so that as much as possible, you're getting, a point of view from the Repatriation Review Committee before anything is actually signed, sealed, and delivered. And I think that's why there have only been 2 cases that have been sort of serious disagreements between the two. But looking to the future, I want to mention that the museum also has a program called Recovering Voices, to which NMAIA and Folklife are also partners. And it's devoted to the preservation and the restitution of endangered languages and endangered knowledge. That's the way we think of going forward. And when you think about that challenge, there's roughly 6,000 languages on Earth, to say nothing of the knowledge associated with that language. And each one of those is an independent instance of what it means to be human. So that program is also based on objects. We see it as tribes or other indigenous communities coming in, seeing their own cultural heritage that's in the museum, and then using that to actually recover their own knowledge and language. And my favorite anecdote for that was an elder who came in, and we had an object that was probably labeled as a ceremonial object. And she saw that and then went off into this string of description about what that object had meant in her native language, using vocabulary that nobody had ever heard about, telling stories about traditions that nobody knew about. And I think that's one of the values of a museum collection, and yet isn't it so interesting that repatriation is also about that museum collection? So looking into the future, there's a couple of other ways that some of these controversies could be settled. One is 3D digital printing. So that's where you can take an object, scan it using light, and then produce an essentially identical object. It's in plastic, God knows, but at least it's a duplicate. And our biggest success with that was with the Tlingit clan leaders in Alaska. They had asked for a replica of a killer whale clan hat. And they wanted a copy in order to be able to teach their young people about this. That hat in particular was in good enough shape that we of course repatriated the hat, but they were able to dance the hat again. So a big plus for them. We have other hats in the collection that you couldn't dance. They're in too fragile a position, and we're talking to those communities to see whether or not, it doesn't have to be plastic. We could do it, the original wood was probably cedar. We could make a duplicate hat out of cedar, and they could use it even to, in whatever way they wanted to see fit. So there are a couple of sort of futuristic compromises, I think, that may make some of these issues more easier to compromise about and easier to settle with. I guess the last thing to say is perhaps about international repatriation, since that's come up. The National Museum of Natural History does do international repatriations. We just don't call them repatriation because we have a repatriation office. It's governed by national federal law. We sort of honor international repatriation in the breach by saying, come to us, talk to us, what would you like? Let's see if we can work it out. And we've done 2 international repatriations so far, one to Arnhem Land in Australia, and another one that's, I think it's still underway to New Zealand, or maybe that one's done. So, thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. So you mentioned that there have only been 2 appeals heard by the review committee, but in one of those, the review committee recommended the return, but the Smithsonian decided not to return the materials, and after several reviews and levels of appeal. And without getting into the specifics of that case, I guess I'd like you to comment on how much weight and respect the Smithsonian, and in particular natural history, gives to the recommendations of the review committee.
Well, a lot. I spent 5 years trying to make the Repatriation Review Committee as happy as possible. But they do settle some of those cases. Both of the ones you mentioned were actually before my time, so I'm not, and I know that each of them was, had a lot of factual difficulties with them. But that's why we have a Repatriation Review Committee to help us do that. And I think to the extent that any of us have to be involved in appeals is probably evidence that the let's talk model failed somewhere along the line. It may be the case that there really are irreconcilable differences. And as you said, our standard is preponderance of evidence and best available scientific procedures. But that almost never happens. In my experience, there's usually a way through this. So I might also say that another service that we provide is with respect to the ability of a community to take a fragile object and care for it appropriately, that in 4 or 5 cases, what happens in a case like that is that the objects are repatriated, they belong to the tribe can do whatever they want, but in a couple of cases, they've decided that they would like the museum to ask to operate as a repository for them. And that's something we provide in perpetuity. We're in the forever business. But the other thing I'd like to say is we also have a grant program that brings roughly 30 tribes in to consult in a sort of a proactive way, which is, over the years, has given away hundreds of thousands of dollars to try and build these bridges to communities.
This is a question that was actually submitted by someone either maybe here in the room or in advance of the symposium, asking whether, with the consent of a tribe, the Smithsonian would ever consider doing any kind of DNA sampling and analysis prior to repatriation in order to better understand diseases, for example, that plague native populations. Now, I know Brenda commented that NMAI would not necessarily consider that appropriate, but we didn't ask the question to her, although you may want to comment at some point as to if a tribe actually consented to that and or asked for it, is that something that either NMAI would consider or natural history? I don't know if you both want to tackle that one.
If a tribe made that request, it's something that the Board of Trustees would have to consider and weigh and make a decision on. I'm not in any position as an individual member to have a real opinion on that. I mean, we would definitely take the request seriously under advisement.
We would. There's a science side to our brains, and so genomics and DNA is a powerful tool in all kinds of pushing back ignorance in various ways. So, but I don't think we would ever do it without consulting with tribes as to whether it was. It's, I think, an open question whether, if you want to get it right. Speaking as I'm transitioning into a job as a director of something called the Global Genome Initiative, so I know something about it. But there are issues of unaffiliated human remains that could be settled this way. As you all know, there's a large and growing field of forensic use of DNA to answer tough questions. So who knows? We're not ready for it yet, I don't think, but technically it's a possibility.